Greetings! In this video I'll be painting an Infernus Marine Sergeant from the Atlantian Spears Chapter. This chapter was requested by a viewer. If you have any requests, let me know in the comments. I've 3D printed the markings for the pauldrons according to the Warzone Octarius campaign book from 9th edition. This includes an alternate styled Codex Astartes fire support tactical marking, in the style of an explosion instead of the usual chevron. For weapons, this Infernus Marine Sergeant is armed with a power fist from one of the new Space Wolves kits, but with the iconography cut away, and a hand flamer from the Assault Intercessors kit. As this paint scheme is a fairly light colour, I've started with a grey Seer undercoat over a black primer. You can start with a grey spray can if you prefer. Using black and then grey just works faster for my airbrush setup. Now moving on to the paint job itself, starting with an all-over base coat of Sybarite green. This colour is almost perfect for the Atlantian Spears, but it's a little bit too minty, which I'll try to fix in later steps. A few thin coats to get nice coverage, and that's that. Next I started to try and tint the armour towards a more teal colour, starting with Coelia green shade over the entirety of the previously applied base coat. This colour has a little bit of blue in it, but it didn't have the tinting effect I was looking for. It did do a good job at the panel lines though. After waiting for the shade paint to dry, I applied 2 passes of Aethermatic blue. This is a pale blue colour that's very transparent. It'd probably be good for ice in other settings, but it turned out to be almost perfect for the tone I was looking for. I should mention the footage is a little washed out, but I haven't found a good colour correction setting that doesn't ruin other colours. The footage at the end is a lot more closer to reality. Next I used some Abaddon black to paint in the black armour details, as well as the chapter armorial, tactical marking and weapon casing. Quickly moving over to the leather, I used Rhinox hide as a base coat. Then I use Skrag brown to layer up the leather. I do some edge highlights and thinly apply it towards the bottom, getting a gradient to form. Lastly, I use Deathclaw brown to do some dots along the sharp points to emphasise some wear and tear. I have a new leather recipe that I use in some other videos, but I chose this one as it stands out a lot more, which I think looks better against the smooth blue-green armour. Now briefly going over the wrist lights. I use some Evil Sunz Scarlet as a base coat, followed by some smaller highlights with Wild Rider red and then Lugganath orange. The Atlantian Spears have green eye lenses for their gold helmets, and I thought green wrist lights over the blue-green armour wouldn't stand out enough, so I picked red. Speaking of gold, I used Retributor armour for the gold details. This includes the Imperialis on the torso, the helmet, the pauldron trims, the little skull on the weapon casing, and some hand-painted numbers on the tactical marking, as I don't have any gold transfers that would fit this. I tried to go carefully with these, though my free-handing isn't the best, let alone with the metallics and a synthetic brush. I switched back to Abaddon black and cleaned up the squad number a bit. It's not perfect, but I think it'll do fine. Deciding against enamel this time around, I used some Seraphim Sepia to shade the Retributor armour gold bits. I preferred the old formula for this. My old pot is labelled 2018, but it's almost empty. At this point I used some gloss varnish on the left knee, preparing it for decals later. While the gloss varnish was drying, I switched to gunmetal grey to paint in all the silver bits, such as the connection ports on the rear of the legs, the power pack details, the weapon chassis and heat shield, and the details on the helmet, namely the iron skull denoting this guy as a sergeant. Next I used some duraluminum to highlight the silver bits, dotting rivets and painting along the edges of various surfaces to brighten them up. The heat shield on the flamer was a focus, to brighten it up in preparation for later weathering. With the metallics done for now, I switched over to Warpstone Glow to base coat the eye lenses on the helmet. 2 passes and it's blocked in nicely. Next, I used some Moot Green applied in a smaller area, avoiding the recesses so as to form a bit of a gradient. Lastly, I used some Dorn Yellow for a final pass. This was applied fairly thinly along the top of each lens, probably resulting in some of the cleanest eyes I've done thus far. Now moving back to the silver, and keeping with that Citadel shade paint theme, I used some Nuln oil over all of the silver details. This looks really faint when it's being applied, but once dry it's surprisingly good. Still faint, but I like the effect. I applied the company marking off camera. This decal signifies the Mariners from the 4th Company. Now for some heat effects on the hand flamer, starting with Magos Purple applied over the front third of the shroud. Whilst the Magos Purple is still wet, I switched to Aggaros Dunes and applied it in the remaining area, lightly mixing the paints on the model itself to form a transition. I also applied this to the fuel canister, helping it stand out as a different metal. Contrast paints seem to work better than shades for this effect. Maybe it's due to the shade formula changing as I mentioned earlier. Now for some final details, starting with an edge highlight using Sybarite Green. This is the original armour colour, but as the armour has received 2 passes to tint and shade it, this paint is a little brighter than what we have currently. I didn't want the model to be without some battle damage, so I also painted in some faint scratches around the model, some larger than others too, so I can use a darker paint for some chipping over them later. The highlight and scratches are fairly faint as I mentioned, so I got these close-up shots that hopefully show a clearer example of what I did. Next, use some Skavenblight Dinge as the chipping colour, applying small dots stacked as chips inside the larger chips and scratches that I did with the previous colour. I also did an edge highlight for the black weapon casing, though it seems like the Nuln oil did most of the work highlighting this one. The hand flamer was a bit too bright and clean despite the heat effect, so I switched back to Abaddon Black and dry brushed over the shroud to imitate some scorching. With all that done, I applied my usual basing method, painted the base rim black, then sealed everything in with some ultramatte varnish. And here we have it! An Infernus Marine Sergeant from the Atlantian Spears Chapter. Going into this scheme, I thought the armour colour was going to be simpler than it was. I figured Sybarite Green by itself would work with maybe a teal wash, but Sybarite Green was more of a mint colour than a teal, so I went into recovery mode. That being said, I think the final result is very nice. I just wish it was simpler than a bright paint and 2 transparent paints, especially if you make a mistake and you need to repaint an entire section to get it looking right again. Whilst I don't own the paint, Eldari Emerald Contrast looks like a similar colour to this on some swatches that I've seen, so maybe that paint over a white or grey undercoat would give a similar result for less steps. As for the rest of the model, I'm very happy with it. Each piece came out nicely, though the freehand is a little rough. It's something I need to get better at, I know. I hope you guys enjoyed it either way, and let me know in the comments if you want any specific chapters covered, and I'll add them to my to-do list. Anyway, I hope you stick around for the next one.